My Years with Apu, a memoir by Satyajit Ray, read by Suyash Mohan. Preface. The final draft of My Years with Apu was stolen when my husband was in the nursing home fighting for his life. It was found missing when my son and daughter-in-law went into his room to sort things out about a week after his passing away. My daughter-in-law had seen him putting it on top of the table near him, but it was no longer there. A frantic search went on for 3 nights and days. Finally, they gave up. They didn't tell me anything about it at the time, because they knew nothing would register in the state of deep anguish I was in then. I came to know about it 3 months later. They had somehow managed to find the first draft, which my son handed over to me, saying, "Ma, you are the only person who can make something out of this." I took one look and put it aside. I knew it would make sense to no one but my husband. How could I possibly decipher the indecipherable? The draft consisted of sentences, half-sentences, thoughts and ideas and incidents jotted down in such a hurry that many letters were not even properly formed. A kind of helplessness assailed me. I took a second look, and then a third, and found, to my utter surprise, that the thoughts, ideas and incidents were magically taking shape and beginning to make sense. Slowly a strong determination, which I had never known I possessed, took hold of me. I sat and struggled with it for 1 year and 8 months and was able to reconstruct it. It breaks my heart to hand over this unfinished version of his last work to the readers. I am using the word unfinished because I know he must have made copious additions, alterations, corrections, and improvements to the final draft which was stolen, and the finished product would have been a joy to read in his wonderfully lucid, polished, and impeccable English. We have been deprived of this treat, but still, something is better than nothing, and I feel happy in a way, because I have been able to contribute to making this book possible. Satyajit Ray, Calcutta, September 1994. 1. Flashback. Even a year before the autumn afternoon in 1952, when I started shooting Pather Panchali in a field of tall white kash flowers, the thought of taking up filmmaking as a career hadn't occurred to me at all. I had a safe job as the art director of a British advertising agency with whom I had worked for 10 years. Although I was beginning to realize with some dismay that an advertising artist was never free, but had to conform to the whims of clients who held the purse strings. I stuck to the job as I had grown up with the notion that nothing was more desirable for a young man than financial security. My father and grandfather had never held jobs. Grandfather Upendra Kishore was a true Renaissance man who wrote, painted, played the violin and composed songs. He was a pioneer in half-tone block making and founded a printing press which soon established itself as the finest in the country. He died in 1915 at the age of 52, 6 years before I was born. He had sent his eldest son Sukumar, my father, to England to study printing technology. Father stood first in the final examination at the Manchester School of Printing Technology. He returned home while grandfather was still alive, got married, and joined his father's business. I was born in 1921, the year that father was taken ill with what was then an incurable tropical disease called Kala Azar. He was in and out of bed for 2.5 years, looking after the press and contributing poems, stories, and illustrations to Shondesh, a children's magazine which my grandfather founded when he was comparatively well. After father's death at the age of 36, the press carried on for 3 years. Thereafter, the business changed hands and we had to leave our spacious residence in North Calcutta. My mother and I was the only child, moved to my maternal uncle's house at the southern end of the city. This extreme generosity on my uncle's part literally saved us from a fate that could have been catastrophic. My uncle was still a bachelor. He worked in an insurance company and he was already providing for a younger, unmarried sister. But he took us into his house because he wanted to repay the help my father had given him when he was a student in the city. My mother, on her part, looked after the household affairs, the day-to-day expenses, and took charge of the kitchen and so on. To add to the family income, she took a job teaching needlework in a widow's home, traveling to and fro by bus. And where did cinema fit into the scheme of things? The answer is that I became a film fan while still at school. I avidly read picture-goer and photoplay, neglected my studies, and gorged myself on Hollywood gossip, purveyed by Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons. Deanna Durbin became a favorite not only because of her looks and her obvious gift as an actress, but because of a lovely soprano voice. Also firm favorites were Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, all of whose films I saw several times just to learn the Irving Berlin and Jerome Kern tunes by heart. At some point in my early college years, my interest shifted from the stars to the directors. This was probably triggered by a reading of the 2 books on film theory by Pudovkin. At any rate, I could clearly see that my intense interest in Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, Gary Cooper, Cary Grant was giving way to an interest in Ernst Lubitsch, John Ford, Frank Capra, William Wyler, George Stevens, et al. At this point, I chanced upon an issue of Sight and Sound and became a subscriber. It was a most exciting period. I had discovered a new world. When I watched a film, I was no longer interested in just what the stars were doing, but was also observing how the camera was being deployed, when the cuts came, how the narrative unfolded. What were the characteristics that distinguished the work of one director from another? Meanwhile, something else had caught my imagination and rivaled my interest in cinema. It was Western classical music. I had grown up in an atmosphere of Indian music, particularly the songs of Tagore, as virtually everyone on my mother's side had a natural singing voice. But side by side with Tagore songs, I heard, as a very small boy, waltzes and marches on a toy gramophone I had been given as a birthday present, which came with records the size of the modern compact discs. My ear was thus attuned to Western music from a very early age. At school, I discovered the popular classics, the works from the New World Symphony, Tchaikovsky's piano concertos, Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody, and found I was captivated. I soon began to buy records with my pocket money. At first, I bought second-hand ones from the flea market. I remember paying 8 annas, about 2d, each for black label HMV records of Beethoven's Egmont and Coriolan overtures. Later, I bought new records of the symphonies and concertos, but at first could afford only one movement at a time per month. It was only after I got a job that I could afford to buy the complete works. By then, Tovey's 4 volumes of Essay in Musical Analysis had become my bedside reading, and I had got into the habit of listening to my records with my eyes on a miniature score. With these 2 pursuits eating up my time, I began to neglect my studies. I read science the first 2 years, barely surviving the onslaught of sines and cosines and the rude facts of physics and chemistry. In my 3rd year in college, for my graduation, I decided to take up humanities. A friend of my father's, a leading statistician, urged that I should read economics so that immediately after graduation I could get a job in the Indian Statistical Institute, which he headed. I did as I was told, swayed by the magic word job, and I never ceased to regret it. I loathed the subject, and only managed to graduate with second-class honors through sheer cramming. I was 18 then, and decided to give up further studies. My mother felt it was...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?